Hi, my name is Mike Thompson. I'm from the Sensible Code Company, and I'm going to be talking about some work that we've done to explain the impact of differential privacy on the US Census outputs using real-time confidence interval tabulation. And this is some work that we've done with data that's been published openly by the US Census Bureau and information that they've published about how they've done calculations for confidence intervals. So to begin with, I have this book at home called The Cartoon Guide to Statistics. And the reason I have the book is that while I studied maths and physics at university, statistics wasn't really my favorite subject. And I think it was the kind of the fuzzy edges and the uncertainty of it all that I found a bit difficult to grapple with. So now at work, when we're dealing with some new statistical concept, I often get this book out and it's got pretty good explanations of things and how they work. And it has this quote on the second page, which is that what makes statistics unique is its ability to quantify uncertainty, which I think is kind of a helpful way of thinking about it. And in official statistics, it's not just about quantifying uncertainty, but communicating uncertainty as well. Because as we know, in official statistics, communication is almost as important as the actual kind of handling of the numbers. So quantifying uncertainty can be difficult, and communicating it can be even harder, especially in a world that wants simple truths. Before I carry on with the main topic of the day, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who we are. So we make a product called Cantabular, and Cantabular helps organizations like yours, like National Statistical Institutes, to deliver more data faster with automated safe data access. And how it works at a very simple level is that you can load up confidential microdata, and then our software Cantabular allows safe outputs to be created directly from the microdata by users. Our software has been used by the Office for National Statistics to power a product called Create a Custom Dataset, which was used to publish the 2021 England and Wales census. It's been used by the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency to help them publish a flexible table builder for the Northern Ireland 2021 census. We've also used it to republish the historic 1911 Ireland census in a kind of interactive format. And more recently, and this is what I'm talking about today, we've used it to publish census cross tabulations from the 2010 US Census with confidence intervals applied in real time. So we've done a lot of stuff to do with census, but something that's always struck me as odd with census is that the data is never presented with uncertainty attached. And you might say, well, that's fair enough, because census is a full enumeration of the population. It's not a sample, so you don't need to present uncertainty. But also, I think there's an argument that if you started to present census results along with uncertainty, with errors, that could be perceived by a general audience or by policymakers as undermining the results in some way. Also, if you were to provide uncertainty calculations or quantification along with the data, that often entails additional complexity, that extra methodology has to be used in order to calculate the uncertainty of the statistics. And finally, organizations like National Statistical Institutes put a lot of effort into reducing the uncertainty of the data. So we heard a lot about it in the UNECE conference so far. So there's a lot of effort that goes into making sure that you know exactly where people live. So where people's houses are by updating address registers. There's lots of different methods of collecting data for a census, whether that's face-to-face, whether that's with paper forms, whether that's online. There's continuous monitoring of response rates across different areas of a country to see who's responding and who isn't, and where people aren't responding so that they can be chased up. When the data is collected, then duplicates are often identified and removed. There's coverage surveys to facilitate that. There's imputation to deal with undercounts. There's a huge amount of methodology that goes into reducing uncertainty. But there is an exception to this. And there is a piece of methodology that is all about increasing uncertainty, and that's privacy methodology or statistical disclosure control. And really the aim there is to deliberately increase uncertainty, because National Statistical Institutes often have a legal obligation to protect the privacy of the people whose data they hold. And unfortunately, Disclosure control, and it's here there's a description of various different methods that are used, is only getting harder. And the reason for that is that computing power has been growing exponentially for the last few decades. Now I can sign up for, I can hire a computer for a few hours from AWS that would cost me tens of thousands of pounds to buy if I wanted to buy one myself. And that's just a few clicks of a button away. I can get access to large and public or commercial databases of people. And these things put together mean that it's much easier for someone to stage an attack against data than it would have been in the past. And it's in the context of these challenges that the US Census Bureau decided to radically change their approach to privacy methodology. And for the 2020 census, they adopted a new approach called differential privacy. So they laid out a pretty compelling argument for changing their approach to SDC. And this was an article from 2018, but there was a lot of different stuff that was published and explainers and videos and so on. But basically what happened was they decided to avail themselves of all of this public data and of this computing power to try and attack their own results from the 2010 census. And having done that, they found they were able to reconstruct a large enough proportion of their data, of their microdata, to enough of a degree of accuracy that they felt they had to change their approach in order to keep public trust. And they designed an approach to protecting the 2020 data called the top-down algorithm. So the way that worked, and I'm going to explain this quickly because it will be relevant to some of the other stuff that I'll be showing later on. The way this works is they take their confidential microdata, so post-collection, post-processing, and then create a large set of tables from that, cross-tabulations of the data. Then they add noise to those tables, to the counts in those tables drawn from, well, using a differentially private mechanism, but drawn from a noise distribution. Then they take those cross-tabulations and they're post-processed in various ways. So they do things like certain numbers have to be true to the original microdata, so they remove the noise from those numbers. They also have to make sure there are various sort of constraints in the data, such as you don't want to end up with married 3-year-olds that need to be enforced. So the post-processing does all of that. And then there's a final step which takes these noisy tabulations and then creates a set of microdata from them. It sort of treats them as a big set of simultaneous equations and reverse engineers back to a set of microdata that explains them, which is a sort of synthetic microdata set, which is then a differentially private set of microdata that can be published publicly. So this was the approach that they took, but it turned out to be very controversial. So a number of states in the US sued the Census Bureau over these attempts to improve the privacy of the data because they felt that it was going to compromise the results too much. Then there were civil rights groups that were concerned that the effect of the noise would be to wipe out the presence of the groups that they represented in the data. And demographers, some academic demographers, were raising concerns about the effect this was going to have on the utility of census microdata for ongoing research in the future. So it was a controversial move. And the Census Bureau did make changes to address the concerns that that people raised, but so this quote that I found from Dr. John O'Bowd in a video, and he felt that actually what was going on here was that because privacy protections are doing this job of increasing uncertainty, it's something that people aren't that comfortable with. And he felt that actually what they'd done was sort of brought privacy protection out of the shadows and shone more light on what was actually happening. And that it showed the controversy that often revolves around this kind of topic. So I think part of the challenge they were facing here was that they'd added uncertainty to the data without really quantifying it properly. So people couldn't understand the extent of the uncertainty that had been added to the data. And this quote here is from a paper published by IPUMS about this US Census Bureau data, and saying that they really should provide documentation and tools for people who are using the data to gauge the reliability of the statistics. And if they don't, then producers might create statistics that are unusable or misleading. So in other words, the uncertainty in the data that's been introduced should be quantified and communicated. So they took this on board and they came up with an approach to quantifying the uncertainty of that top-down algorithm that I just took us through. And that approach was using Monte Carlo simulation methods. So to go back to this diagram of the top-down algorithm, the approach they came up with effectively took the output of this algorithm and then ran it back through the same process a number of times to generate a sort of a set of microdata files. So we started off with one microdata file, but running it through this process a number of times, they ended up with 26 microdata files. So that's 26 lots of 15 gigabytes, which is the size of each of these files, 26 slots of 320 million rows, so 8 billion rows of data. And then in principle, what someone can do with these microdata files is to run the same query, the same cross tabulation across all of them, and then use a calculation that the US Census Bureau have specified to calculate the confidence interval for each of the counts across these 26 sets of microdata. So you get 26 tables for your query, and then you can plug those into a confidence interval tabulation, which gives you a true count plus a set of a confidence interval for each cell. So that's great in principle, but in practice, it's actually quite difficult for someone to do this because that volume of data is very, very hard for anyone to work with, and you need kind of significant software engineering skills to do that. So this is where we come in. So we took all of this publicly available data, and we took the methodology that the US Census Bureau had written about publicly, and we used our existing tabulation technology in Cantabular, which is very fast and can handle this kind of volume of data. And we added in a module that does this confidence interval calculation. I'm going to show you now how that works. So this is our software Cantabular loaded up with this 2010 microdata, and it's loaded up with 26 of these microdata files. So I can go ahead and create a query. So I'm going to look at county level in the United States. I can select specific counties that I want to get data for. I'm going to look up here at New York. So I'm going to add a few counties around New York there to my query. And then I'm going to just look at a single variable. So the US Census data, as you probably know, doesn't have lots of variables in it. I'm going to choose this group quarters type variable, which tells us about sort of communal establishments that people are living in. And then I'm going to make sure I've got the count measure, and I'm going to add the confidence interval data into the table as well. So now I've built the table, and you can see it's done that very quickly given how big the underlying data is. And I could download it straight away, but I'm going to just have a look at a preview of the data here. And as I scroll down, you can see over here on the right, we're presented with the count, which is from the kind of original microdata produced, and then the confidence interval, which is created from that set of 25 other microdata files. And this immediately starts to give us a sense of how accurate these numbers are. And if I scroll a bit further down, you can see that if we look at some of the smaller numbers, there's really quite a large range here. So the count published from the original set of microdata is 57, but we're told that the range is actually, well, the 95% confidence interval is from 0 to 81. So quite a large confidence interval for some of these numbers. So if I go back to my presentation, so what lessons did we learn from doing this? Well, it shows, I think, the importance of quantifying uncertainty, not just and communicating it as part of statistical publication. But there's also a more specific lesson here, which is that it's the sort of the model of census as a full enumeration of the population, where you go out and count everybody, is very easy for people to understand. But as soon as you start doing more advanced things with methodology, it starts getting a lot more distant from people's kind of instinctive understanding of how these things work. So as organizations move to more kind of administrative-based censuses, it's going to be much more important to communicate uncertainty as complexity increases. Secondly, the US Census, I think we're very brave. The US Census Bureau were very brave to innovate here and do something different. But when you're innovating, it's really important to make sure that you're iterating, that you're testing, and that you're communicating as you go along the impact of what you're doing. And thirdly, privacy and publication methodologies are very intertwined. So if you want to change your privacy methodologies, it may well have an impact on how you publish and what you can publish. And if you want to publish data in completely new ways, you might have to adopt different privacy methodologies to enable that. So these two things are very intertwined. So if you're going to change one, you have to think it through. So you need to make a plan in advance and make sure you're covering all the bases. Okay, that's it. Thank you.